Maddie, Marcus, Andrew, friends, colleagues, clients. Nice time to be in LA with Milken in town, and we've had some folks here today that were at the conference, and a lot of talk there about interest rates, inflation, and other economic currents, war, what will likely be a hotly contested political election, concern about how that's impacted the M&A and capital markets, but it doesn't really seem to be impacting what we do day in and day out. So starting with Andrew first, I view this asset class as pretty resilient. How are you guys looking at it on the banking side?
So we see it as a number of different asset classes, right? Within sports, you have, seed, right? There's early stage, there's venture, there's growth, there's more of like a private equity. And then when it gets into professional sports ownership, it's no longer a traditional asset class that many people play in, right? It is not a private equity valuation, it's not a venture valuation. It is, there's 50 to 75 major teams around the world, and there are a couple hundred people who can afford those teams, and basically their wealth dictates how much those teams go for. And no matter how us bankers try to come up with valuations and everything, at the end of the day, when you're selling a sports team, it's more like selling rare art, rare real estate, and it's a fair market value play as opposed to a multiple of revenue of some kind. So what we've seen throughout the years is when the macro environment is affected, some sports team owners need to sell, some people can't afford teams, but there's also some newly minted wealth that now wants to go own these trophy assets. So we've found pro sports extremely resilient to macroeconomics, where the other asset classes that would be more private equity, venture, or seed are very susceptible to it.
Marcus, your thoughts?
I'd agree with that 100%. And I think if you just looked at, growth in values over the course of the past 20 years across, as an example, the major, 4 sports leagues in the U.S., they're running CAGRs in the 11, 12% range versus the S&P. S&P's had, 4 down cycles over the course of the past 20 years. The big 4 average 1 effectively. And so just incredibly resilient. I think we all know this, low correlation to the public markets. But I do think that for the folks in here who are fund managers, I think the one thing that we've certainly been witness to is the M&A environment and the troubles in the M&A environment, sort of the slowdown, has led to a lack of distributions back to LPs. And so, we're truly in the early innings of an asset class that's growing like a weed, but for it to truly, truly thrive, 1, LPs need capital returned, because 2, it allows them to allocate to managers. And for us, the M&A business is a really important part of our business. And so as we think about it, most of the funds in the sports space, particularly the dedicated funds, are on Fund 1, right? And they're heavily reliant upon the allocations from institutional investors, A, to be competitive, particularly in the Big Four because of the minimum capital requirements, but B, to just obviously do deals. And so I think one of the things that's really happened from a macro perspective is it's put a damper on the ability of capital allocators to allocate and scale to emerging managers. The good news is they're creative and they're finding ways to do deals, right? And which makes for an incredibly exciting time for us. But I think that when I think about it, I think that's one of the real drivers around how this scales over time.
Maddie, you're focused on a lot of team deals, I know. What are you seeing in the space right now?
Yeah, I'd say, COVID was the perfect case study for us all. Values did not decrease during that time, and I think you're seeing a lot of new entrants coming into the sports space wanting to own a team for that diversification play of, okay, we've seen it happen now, sports teams' values have gone up, they're continuing to grow, where not a lot of industries had that experience during COVID. So I think the space is just growing and there's more people coming into it.
But for the NWSL and 1 or 2 other leagues, they're really not making any more teams. And so it's still a case of supply and demand. We have worked with each of you guys on big deals, record-breaking deals recently, from Commanders to Suns to some of the NWSL deals. We did Chicago Red Stars together for $60 million to the Ricketts family, and the values just keep going up and up and up. Some have said it's a little bit speculative. It could be a bubble. There could be an end in sight. Maybe start with you, Maddie, because you have been so active on the NWSL and other women's deal. You see this sort of slowing or continuing?
No, I think the first thing that happened was a correction. These were undervalued on the women's side. I think I come from a tech banking background, and when you look at software startups especially, they're on revenue multiples. They're not looking at bottom line because there's enough growth and white space ahead of them. When you're looking at sports, there's so much more room to grow that I don't see it slowing down, especially when you look at the global play, when you look at everything that's out there. I don't think there's a risk of this space getting small and there being any risk for these teams of places they can grow.
Yeah, particularly as it relates to women's sports, I'm incredibly bullish on women's sports. And just a little sidebar, I have two daughters. One's 13. She plays club volleyball. And for any of you in this room who've been to a girls' club volleyball tournament, it is a spectacle. Warehouse is full of kids at each age level. And so you just look at the undercurrent around women's sports and the arbitrage between media rights values for the NBA, as an example, versus the WNBA. And there's just a massive gap that will certainly close over time, and we're seeing it with the emergence of Caitlin Clark, Juju Watkins, and what she's going to do, creating just tremendous enthusiasm for women's sport. And I think that going forward, we're going to continue to see that kind of appreciation.
Yeah, I just hop back in there quickly. When you look at the top teams, they're more than just sports. It's a brand that they're creating. I would argue on the women's side, that opportunity is much larger from a social political standpoint, from a lifestyle branding, from fashion, everything you could build beyond just the pitch. I think I'm way more bullish on women's sports in that aspect.
And if you go to any of those volleyball tournaments, bring earplugs, because it's very loud. I've been there. You know I'll just end. They said everything needed to be said about this, but interesting story. We were in a meeting with Michael Eisner's family office a couple years ago, and somebody was really pressing him, over pressing him on why he bought Portsmouth, and to the point of almost disrespectful. And so he just, being the statesman, he leaned back and he said, "Listen, I own all 7 of these TV shows. And 2 years ago, NBC had that one, CBS had that one, ABC had that one." He said, "Now Hulu's got that one, YouTube has that one, Amazon has this one." He said, "The reason I bought Portsmouth is because I've been a part of these networks. And without live sports, these massive multi-billion-dollar platforms, these networks, sports is the last thing that really works on there. And without them, they're in trouble." So he said, "I could have bought Portsmouth for 5 times what I bought it for, and it would still pencil out because of the need for the networks." And I mean, that was a crystal ball. We've seen what drives our industry, this industry, more than anything is rights fees, and they're not going away. I mean, some of these new rights fees are unbelievable. So
You're so spot on. I mean, think about it. We're in a world today where, there's been incredible disruption. So you have all the streamers who are all over this, but the NBA is on the verge of a media rights deal that could be 2 to 3x the prior deal, which, is unfathomable, 5-10 years ago. And so we're just, I don't know where it ends, but I certainly believe there's a tremendous amount of room to run, particularly for women's sports and some of the emerging sports.
totally agree.
I mean, sports was, 98 of the top 100 broadcasts last year. I think 96 of the 98 were the NFL. And so, 1 or 2 other playoff games snuck in. And it really is the only appointment viewing out there. And that's true even in election years. You mentioned the NFL, you mentioned private equity. We know the NFL is considering private equity investment. It will be the last of the big 5 U.S. leagues to permit it, assuming that they end up modifying their constitution. The other 4 big U.S. leagues have permitted some form of private equity investment now since about 2019. I think PitchBook reported last fall that over 60 U.S. teams, excluding the NFL, have some private equity involvement, whether that's owners who were principals in private equity firms, or now the private equity firms investing directly. When you guys as bankers are representing private equity on the buy side, how is it different than representing individuals? I mean, Andrew, you mentioned these assets as being trophy assets. When you're representing private equity, are you viewing these as trophy assets, or is it all bottom line focused? Different approach, or it's the same?
I mean, it's all situational, but for the most part, it is different. And they also, in the past few years have invested differently. The way that a high net worth individual would purchase a team is often different than the way a private equity would get involved. But there's certainly more discipline and less passion when the private equity guys are involved than high net worth who's made all the money in the world and wants to own something that they've been passionate about forever. So we've definitely seen that difference.
You guys approach it differently?
Yeah, what I would say is there's a little bit of demystifying what private equity is to the ownership group and to the leagues. And what I would say is depending on the situation, it just requires, a little help understanding kind of the value add. The fact that private equity can be long-term in nature, and that it's not chalked up to what you may have seen in the movies or seen on TV, but private equity can be a great partner and a capital solution. And I think coming out of COVID, private equity really started solving problems. And so the good news, on a number of fronts is, there are individuals who come from the private equity world and the hedge fund world that are owners, whether they're controlling owners or minority investors in these clubs. And I think they've done a great job of just educating the leagues and the ownership groups on the value of private equity and how strategic it can be, and how it can provide liquidity and solutions for owners throughout the cap table. If you want to clean up the cap table, it's a great option. Not to mention the fact that as valuations have skyrocketed, if you want to continue to grow these leagues and the brands globally, there are only so many high net worth individuals who can afford these assets today, and so it's incumbent upon them to start to understand, that your private equity can be a real partner.
So it's really demystifying this as a capital source, as opposed to different intentions and different motivations when they're investing.
Absolutely.
You seeing the same, Maddie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you're putting together your ownership group, it's always aligning interests, and that's the same for private equity. Are you just looking for capital? Do you want strategic help? It's the same kind of criteria we're looking for. It's just a different source of capital.
An interesting buyer, just sitting here thinking about this, there's a private equity buyer where the fund is buying it, and then there's the high net, who's not a fund. And an interesting buyer is somebody who's made their money in private equity, but then buys the team outside of their institution, because they can mix sort of their incredible passion and fandom with their discipline of being a private equity. And I think if you look at those buyers, just sitting here thinking about it, they've had some of the most success in acquiring teams. And like if you look at Joe Lacob in Golden State, what he did there, and I mean, some of the people who have spoken here are private equity folks who, personally have purchased teams, and you can watch those things over months and years. Just they're using their private equity knowledge, their understanding of business, to turn these into really well-run machines.
The Golden State Warriors have also won a lot, and you had the advantage of being on the football field for the Rams for a while, not from a player side, but from a owner side. How important is winning? And does that create value, or it doesn't matter? You can, until this year, be the New York Knicks and continue to grow in value without winning. Does it matter?
I think it depends on the owner, and it depends on the city, and it depends on, primarily the owner, but I'll tell you, Peter Luco, I think, is one of the smartest sports execs ever, said a long time ago, the fish stinks from the head down. So when the team isn't playing well, it's usually because of the owner. And you'll watch owners pop in and take over teams, and all of a sudden their business is running better, they're winning games. And I will tell you, playing for Mr. Kroenke, He wasn't out there a lot, but his way of doing things was completely infused in the team, and like everybody understood the culture. And he didn't even own all the. When I played there, Georgia Frontier was the majority owner, but you'd see him.
They have face masks on?
What's that?
They have face masks.
No, he didn't. And if he wanted to hit you, you'd let him hit you. No, but no. I think if the question is does it matter from a business perspective? You can actually sometimes lose money if you win. And if you want to run the team at break even and just hit all the league minimums, you can actually make a lot of money. So it's really up to the owner how they want to run their team. I think nowadays, the person who buys the team and doesn't spend any money on it and just takes money out, that's pretty frowned upon. Mm-hmm. So I think you see much less of that, but it's all situational.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It really starts with the ownership group, the leadership, just like any organization. But winning matters. I think that, and you touched on this a little bit, but building a brand, building culture is important and being embedded in the community. And so I'll give you an example. I grew up in Seattle, and I remember growing up and watching the Portland Trail Blazers. And, as you moved into the 90s, they were competitive, but they sold out every game. I want to say for 20 years, every single game. And it was a function of the leadership and the ownership and being a part of the community. On the other hand, you look at what, Lasry and the ownership group did with the Bucks, or what Vivek has done with the Kings. Being a part of the community and building culture and, creating a winning culture, I think it drives value even further.
Finding the same with the women's clubs, or less tied to winning and valuation? I'm looking at Angel City, locals, Julie was here a bit earlier. Tremendous financial performance in terms of revenue generation, fan impressions. They've been a little bit less fortunate on the pitch. Seems like less correlation. Is that sort of an overstatement, oversimplification on the women's side?
I would say that, U.S. fans, especially, they're sophisticated. They understand a rebuild. They understand things take time. At some point, it matters, but there's an entertainment factor, right? You go to an Angel City game, it's a close game. They're not getting blown out when they lose. It's a close game. It's fun. There's a reason to keep coming. So I think winning matters more when that fan experience is bad, because that's the only reason you're getting people there. Right. Someone like Angel City, you want to go regardless of who's winning it. So
I have to echo that. I just want to jump in. It's so exciting going to their games. What they've been able to do in terms of the culture, the enthusiasm, it is just a fantastic fan experience. And kudos to that team for what they've built.
What's interesting, my daughter plays soccer, so we go to a lot of Angel City games, and I love MLS. LAFC is an amazing experience. I love the MLS, but what dawned on me the first Angel City game that I went to was like, wow, these are the athletes that you watch in the Olympics. So where MLS, it's still entertaining, it's still great. You're talking, I don't know, 4th, 5th tier, certainly not Premier League, where when you're at these women's soccer games, it's remarkable. I mean, you're watching a master class of athletics and sports and soccer, and I think for American fans more than anything, that's what translates. They want to know that when they're watching the NBA, it's the best basketball players in the world, same with football. And when you educate those fans enough that that's what women's soccer is, that's what this league is, I think they'll really gravitate towards it. And then, God forbid, if our men's soccer team ever wins a World Cup, you'll forever see soccer change in this country. Once we feel like, and I heard some folks from FIFA talking about this. They said, when the United States decides to anglicize soccer, the rest of the world has to watch out. And I go, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, Lance Armstrong. That was dominated by Europeans forever, and then America jumps in, and all of a sudden it changes the fabric of our country, because people to this day still ride bikes because of Lance, with or without his issues. So I think when people understand they're watching the best in the world in the U.S., it really changes their attitude.
And do you hear that when you're selling women's clubs and expanding in the NWSL? Is that part of the pitch, that these are the best women players on the globe? Is that part of it?
Yeah, and I think when you look at And what I hope happens the next couple of years in women's sports in general is we start talking about these leagues separately because they are very different models. I think what you see in the WNBA is you don't have that global pressure. You are the top league. There's no one competing near where they are. NWSL, top of mind, is they're in a global landscape and they have to really compete for talent. And we have great American talent, but how are we getting European talent and how are we getting talent from Africa, South America? So it's top of mind. They have a little bit shorter of a leash there of they're in a great place, but they have that global landscape to compete against.
You mentioned the Olympics, which is coming to LA. We've got the World Cup coming. Does that change the dialogue at all? Does that enhance valuation? Does that drive more people to invest around the space, or is it negligible?
You're looking at me, so I'll answer that. I think, like Rugby World Cup is coming here, right? I think that'll be if the U.S. Rugby Association really gets behind that, then I think you'll see a huge lift there. I think, MLS exists because the last time the World Cup was here. I think the Olympics are a little bit different of a dynamic, but we saw what the Soccer World Cup coming here did, and I think if leveraged correctly, that'll happen to some degree with rugby. And I don't know about Olympics because it kind of comes for a couple weeks and then it goes away for a couple of years. So I haven't thought through how that would translate other than local revenue, but. Those other two leagues, certainly. I mean, we've seen hosting events like that absolutely create, groundswell effects within those sports and the valuations.
It certainly helped, as it relates to, women's soccer in the U.S. as well and the NWSL. But I'm going to throw you a curveball. I actually think the Olympics are going to be really interesting for the NBA. And the reason is, you've got Giannis, you've got Luka, you've got Joker, you've got Wemby, and there is a tremendous amount of talent coming out of Europe right now, and it's shining a light on the EuroLeague, and something has to happen.
It is one league that really has not been properly commercialized.
It is incredible, right? Just think about that. Mm-hmm. Joker's going to win, his second or third MVP? Wemby's Rookie of the Year. There's no pro team in Paris. I mean, I think it's going to shine a light on that.
I'll just add to that. I think when you look at the NFL and what they're doing in Europe, and you look at the EPL, consumer habits are changing here too. People wake up to watch games. That morning slot is now a regular habit when you add what's happening there. I totally agree.
Right. It's interesting. I was at the Milken conference yesterday, and Magic Johnson spoke. And he talked about being on the dream team. Yeah. And he actually made an amazing case for how that dream team, the reason that there's so many Europeans in the NBA now is because that dream team was such a global experience that we're seeing the effect of that now. So, by the way, he's the greatest speaker ever. He's my favorite athlete of all time. That was like such a privilege to hear him talk about he talked about dishing a ball to Jordan, and Jordan took off from the free throw line and dunked it in the Olympics, and he's just like, all right, I'm good. Yeah, so anyway.
He is incredible. I heard a story this morning pertaining to the Dodgers sale 10 years ago, and there was about to be a very difficult conversation with then commissioner of the league, and the current owners of the Dodgers were debating who should take the call. And Magic walked in, and they're like, there we go. And what was going to be a very, very difficult conversation with the commissioner ended up going really smoothly. Commissioner wasn't happy, but the whole affect changed because it was Magic on the other side of the phone. Very, very impactful. We've all worked on earlier stage leagues. Mike Rabel in the Green Room is one of the founders of the Premier Lacrosse League, which has gotten great traction, has a great cap table. Some of the other earlier stage leagues have done well. I don't consider the NWSL early stage anymore, which is a great thing. Got the Olympics coming, which will shed a little bit of spotlight on rugby. Rowing is an Olympic sport. Thankfully, I think pickleball is not. But what earlier stage, volleyball you mentioned, which is growing phenomenally, what earlier stage sports, or what sports that may be around for a long time that haven't been commercialized in this country are you guys looking at? Maddie?
You stole it, but volleyball I think is going to be huge. You're seeing little test case and what's happening in college. It's fantastic. I think what Love Volleyball is doing on the club side is incredible, and I think I'm really bullish on that sport.
I couldn't agree more. For those of you who don't know Love Volleyball, it's amazing what they've done. They've consolidated grassroots volleyball. They did that over a number of years, and now they rolled out a professional league. And there's 4 professional leagues that are being rolled out right now, and including what Heath Freeman's doing with the AVP. He bought the AVP, which is beach volleyball. So really interesting things happening on that side. And again, I've been blown away just seeing it firsthand. But there are others. PBR is fascinating. PBR is unbelievable, actually, and great leadership.
That's professional bull riding for those who...
Sorry, yeah, professional bull riding.
Or Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Which go together.
Right, which go together. But, growing like a weed, great distribution. Sale GP is interesting.
Especially with a league backed by Mr. Ellison, right?
Correct. And it doesn't take much from a media rights perspective to move the needle on something like that, but that's interesting and starting to attract, meaningful capital from a growth equity perspective. I won't steal the thunder. I'll leave some for other folks, but those are just a few to name that I think are really interesting.
How about cricket?
We've been active in cricket. I think that look, it's the number 2 sport in the world, right? Huge diaspora, real opportunities. We've been involved, on a number of fronts, including with some of the stuff that's happening here in the U.S. So I'm bullish on cricket, and stay tuned.
So we've been around for about 20 years now, and Premier Cricket was really one of the first leagues where they really professionalized things. And then, sort of around that time, UFC started getting a lot of traction. So I can't tell you how many of you guys probably have had. I've been in more pitch meetings where we're the like Premier Cricket of darts. We're the UFC of this. So I mean, the reality is in these early leagues, it's so difficult. It's so expensive. It's so difficult. And the reason there's so much value created is because it's so hard. It's similar to, creating a platform like Twitter or now X, Facebook, Instagram. It's so difficult to build those that when you can build a platform of that scale, there's a tremendous value for it. So it's tough because you watch a lot of these nascent leagues, early leagues, launching with smart people, good capital, and then there's no consumer fit, and you have to have a lot of money, a lot of staying power, and a lot of things to go right for you in order for those leagues to work. But some of them push through, and the value is enormous. So
we've each been fortunate enough to come into sports deal making from a broader background, doing M&A and capital markets work generally. Is your approach, your focus, any different when it comes to sports investing? And we've covered some of the other comments, but you take a different approach with prospective investors and buyers of properties?
Not so much. I think maybe a little more consultative depending on the situation. And what I mean by that is it goes back to kind of demystifying what it means to partner with private equity, right? And really walking through and helping folks understand kind of the value add. But from and it's fun, right? And so maybe I bring a little more passion and energy because it's fun, but structuring and the creativity and some of the things that you can do are not necessarily all that different from any other M&A deal, buy side or sell side that you've worked on. But what I do love are the people and the personalities involved, it's what makes it incredibly exciting, and just the passion that folks have around these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear each of our panelists really love what they do and bring it to work every day, which is a great feeling. So thank you guys. We're going to wrap up and appreciate you being